aware of attitudes at the home toward the importance of his job.
That's an interesting perspective compared to
totally
all, if we were reading newspapers and watching TV, particularly in 2006, the Iraq War, it was just constant negative coverage, quagmire, we can't win, this is terrible. We just had to tune that stuff out.
Yeah, and it's even more pronounced now with social media. Do we have social media? Was there social media for us in Ramadi?
It was like MySpace. And actually, I do remember Mark Lee used to always come back and get on Facebook.
It existed.
Yeah, Facebook existed, but it was not. I think it like MySpace was still like the dominant.
2006 Echo. Where were we at social media wise? 2006.
Leif is correct. Yes.
Just kicking it
it's
with
like
MySpace.
Between MySpace and
I
Facebook.
thought MySpace was like a music something.
Yeah, you could put music.
So
on
MySpace was legit social media back then.
Yes, and before that too.
And before that.
Yeah, 2007. You said
2006.
Yeah.
What year did Facebook come to prominence?
Oh, I don't know the exact year, but that's when when it was rolling. It was rolling. Sure. But MySpace was still going on as well.
But there was a lot less people on all these things. You know what
yes.
I mean? I mean now it has replaced.
It pre-iPhone, so you couldn't access it with your phone. You could only access it through the your computer.
Yeah, that was like barely right when pictures to the internet started going. Mm-hmm. Like not all phones had cameras and stuff like that.
So, bottom line, we got to pay attention to the influence on morale from outside our organization. Pay attention to it. This next section is called Junior Officers Conferences. And it says there are always many newly commissioned officers, fine officers in the Army. They have come from many sources. Some of these young officers have demonstrated outstanding ability in combat. Others have not had this experience. Few of them have had the time or opportunity to become fully indoctrinated with the duties and responsibilities required of an officer. The standards and responsibilities of an officer are, in many respects, more exacting and more difficult to discharge in peacetime than in combat. Consequently, officers' conferences should be conducted for all junior officers to review the duties and responsibilities of officers. So what am I saying? What he's saying is that, look, you should meet with your subordinate leadership and educate them and teach them. And I often ask this question to clients. I say, has anyone here had a person that invested in them personally? And, most of the time, especially when I'm talking to leaders, most of the time people will raise their hand and say, oh yeah, I had this person that took me under their wing, then I say, well, how did that make you feel? And obviously everyone says, oh yeah, that makes you feel great. It makes you feel like you can do well, and it's a person that's encouraging you. And then I say, how many people are you doing that for right now? And there's less hands, right? And so we take this investment of the people that raised you, like the people that raised me and the teams, right? What if I take that investment, I just hold on to it and don't give it to anybody else? That's horrible. And it's not continuing to grow the capabilities of the community.
There's something deeper there that I when he said roles and responsibilities. So you're reviewing roles and responsibilities with them. And I think that's something that, the Jocko brief that you would give in the junior officer training course. When I was running training for 2 years, I ran training for all SEAL officers who are graduating from our basic training pipeline. And you came in, we'd have you come in and give the Jocko brief. And it was the same thing that you briefed to the task units and platoons going through the workup. And I think one of the most important parts of that was the roles and responsibilities. Yep. So it's great to mentor. I mean, you're right. People don't invest in their people. I agree with that 100%. But I think a lot of people don't know how to mentor people. And what he's saying there, I think, which is if you've got to make their roles and responsibilities clear. And you broke down. I mean, it was shooter. Your job is to make things happen. Get default aggressive. You have it listed out all the way. Fire team leader. Take your 4 guys, lead your fire team, support your squad leader. You had the squad leader. Then you had the platoon commanders. You had the assault chief. You had the assault force commander, the ground force commander, etc. And that was a really powerful document. So much so that I've had several very successful SEALs, including good friends of yours who have reached out to me and said, hey, can we get a copy of that?
Yeah.
Because it really, without breaking that down, enables you to execute with confidence. If you know what your roles and responsibilities are, then you can actually step up and execute with confidence. And I think that's a really, people don't define that. You define it in a way where it was easy to understand and enable people to execute. And I think that's a key thing to mentor people on.
One of the key parts of that, when I would get done talking about what the roles and responsibilities of everyone was, I would say, okay, now that you know your roles and responsibility, you also have to understand the person below you and the person above you of the chain of command. You have to understand what their roles and responsibilities are. And if you have to either ascend or descend into the situation where you can solve a problem and do their job. As soon as you get a problem solved, you can't get stuck there. You have to elevate yourself up to the next position. The last thing that I would start saying to guys once they were done with JOTC, now I'm talking to platoons, is I would say, listen. And I would usually say this just to like the head shed. I would say, listen, here's the roles and responsibilities. I don't actually care who does these things, but you better figure it out. Because sometimes you might have a platoon chief that hadn't been in the teams for a few years and he had some platoon commander that had just gotten back off deployment, or you'd have whatever the case may be. Maybe the LPO just got done teaching assaults out at Tradette and now he's in the platoon, or just got back from land warfare, so he's going to really know how to do that job. So I'd say, listen, it doesn't really matter which one you have. Now I'll tell you, basically, and this is what I always say, basically, enlisted guys, you're the tactical experts. You handle the problem that you got at hand. Officers, you need to figure out what the next move is going to be. And that was the general thing. But then I'd say, listen, if this officer doesn't have any experience whatsoever, and maybe the LPO is kind of badass and the chief is, I'd say, listen, officer, you need to look to your chief and he needs to elevate a little bit and figure out what's going to do next. So, the reason that happened was because as I put more and more platoons through training, I saw that some platoons, they just didn't, they had a mismatch. They had some prior enlisted officer that was freaking just a badass and knew everything, or they had a chief that was, been out of the loop for a while. And so, okay, but the LP, like I said, so eventually I would say, listen, I don't really care how you guys break these up, but you have to know who's responsible for what. And one man cannot do all these jobs. It's not possible for one man to do all these jobs. I've seen some badass SEALs with tons of experience come through here, and they might be able to pull it off for an op or two ops, and then something's going to happen, and all of a sudden it's going to be overwhelmed, and other people have to be able to back them up. Not to mention, if somebody's doing all these jobs, I'm going to kill them, and you better figure it out.
I remember the "don't get stuck there" in all caps.
Don't get stuck there.
The slide.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to cover this section is because it says this. So we're talking about these junior officer conferences. These conferences should be conducted by commanders themselves and on an informal basis. Lieutenants in separate companies and detachments may be invited to join groups from units commanded by a field grade officer. Groups should not be too large. Preaching should be avoided. I read this whole section just so I could say that. Preaching should be avoided. These conferences can well be the means of improving the unit team under the coaching of its captain, the unit commander. These conferences may consist of 1 hour meetings. He goes into some detail about how to do it. But the fact that he's saying, look, you're not bringing people in there to preach on how to do things. You're bringing in there to educate, to have discussions. And he's got the whole topic of discussions here: military courtesies, personal standards, military discipline, promotions, unit history, esprit de corps, accomplishments, missions, troop information, morale, self-education of the officers, professional publications, responsibility for fun. I mean, he's got everything: security classification, use and misuse of military vehicles. So basically it's like, tell the guys what's going on. That's what he's saying. You have to tell people what's going on. And then he's got this commander's checklist for success. And this, we've already been going for a while, so this will probably be the last thing we cover. Every commander at every echelon should maintain a continuing checklist to be left for or given to his successor to command. This checklist should contain items of value that will assist the new commander in becoming familiar with his command more rapidly than if he had to uncover the same items over a period of time. Such items must consist of 1. Significant strengths and weaknesses of key officers and non-commissioned officers in the command. Boom. Isn't it weird that we might be in charge of people and know that we would have to turn this over and not keep track of like whose what strength and weaknesses are? Next, important policy matters announced by senior commanders and not contained in SOP or directives. So you're tracking this stuff. A good turnover is such an important thing to do. And what I think is important about a turnover, it's great to have it to turn over to the next unit, but what it does is it forces you to actually think through how you are operating. And when you force yourself to think through how you're operating, you define it, you refine it, you codify it, and now it becomes stronger. Just like when you write down these principles, just like when you formulate a standard operating procedure, and just like when you teach a jiu-jitsu move or you write out how you do, anytime that you study what you're doing, you will get better at it. And that's what this commander's checklist for successors, I said successor, it's for successors, it's for someone that's going to take your place.
That, you know what, part of that too, I think is, that self-analysis you're talking about is like, hey, what did we screw up? What did we learn from it? I remember giving a turnover one time on a follow-on deployment, and when the new unit came in, the new SEAL unit taking over for us, and one of the senior leaders was like, "This is a great turnover. You guys are giving here. This is one of the best turnovers I've ever seen." I'm like, "Why? Like, why did you say that?" It kind of caught me off guard. I was like, well, "Why do you say that?" He's like, "Because you're telling us all the stuff that you screwed up." and it's really, when you have a unit turning over, thinking like, people are coming in like, get these idiots out of here. We're going to take over, even though we've been there for 6 months learning. And I was like, man, how are you going to learn from us to continue the mission and be more effective if we don't tell you what we screwed up? But clearly he wasn't used to that, and most people weren't doing that. And I think that thinking deeply about it, and if you care about the mission, then you want the people to be successful. I mean, we tried to set up the next SEAL team
for sure.
Steve Ward and his guys certainly.
Yeah. Speaking of Steve Ward, he's going to be coming on the podcast sometime real soon. Names and personalities of individuals outside the command with whom it is necessary to associate and do business. Areas of training, weaknesses within the command. So reporting the weaknesses like you just talked about. Disciplinary matters, security matters, critical equipment shortages. So that's that section. And here's the last thing we'll cover. Vigilance. And by the way, we are on page 13 right now. So, yeah, we are on page 13 of this book. There's 117 pages. We're on page 13. A unit operational readiness status must be ready for immediate employment at all times. Regardless of how well a unit has been trained, the commander cannot allow it to become lax and let down its guard. World War II and the Korean conflict were started by surprise attacks on Sunday mornings. These surprises remind us that we must be ready for anything 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We cannot relax our vigilance in any way that would contribute to disaster. So, there you go. Like I said, that is the first 13 pages of this document.
I'm only 2/3 of the way through my second
just getting
Sour
warmed
Apple
up.
Sniper.
Just getting warmed up. Look, I'll get to the rest of this. I'm sure I'll cover this thing. But it's just incredible to see how these principles remain the same over time. And it's so intriguing to uncover the roots of Hackworth and About Face, and thereby the roots of me and of you and of extreme ownership and the dichotomy of leadership and leadership strategy and tactics. There's a thread you can trace through all these books. You got to know your roots. And the better you understand, yes, history, but the better you understand the origin of ideas and principles, then the better you understand those ideas and principles themselves. And the better leader and person you will